Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to, well, pull back the curtain on a phenomenon that honestly feels like it belongs in a science fiction movie.
Yeah, but it is actually happening right now.
Exactly. It's happening in our city halls, our federal agencies, and legislative chambers all over the world.
We have a really fascinating stack of sources to look at today.
We do. We're looking at this brilliant analysis by Johan Steyn. He's an author and thought leader in the AI space.
Right, and we're combining that with some major investigative reports.
Yeah, from ProPublica, Transformer News, Tech Policy Press, and Global Voices. And the core topic we're unpacking today is that artificial intelligence is now secretly in the room where our laws are made.
Which is just a massive shift in how societies govern themselves.
It really is. We're going to explore how AI is actively drafting the rules that govern your life, the hidden risks this poses, and why what we call the polite fiction that humans are fully in charge is rapidly collapsing.
Because for centuries, we've operated on this really basic assumption, right? When a new law is introduced, you assume a human being sat down, researched the issue, and carefully chose every single word.
Right. The text of a law is supposed to be the physical manifestation of democratic intent.
Exactly, which is what makes the story out of Brazil so incredibly jarring.
Oh, man, yeah. So Global Voices published this detailed account from October 2023. It happened in the city Porto Alegre.
Right.
There was a city councillor named Ramiro Rosario, and he wanted to pass a bill stopping the city from charging taxpayers to replace stolen water meters.
Sounds like a standard local issue.
Yeah, but instead of drafting the legislation and going through committee reviews, he just opened his computer and typed a 49-word prompt into ChatGPT.
He literally asked a chatbot to write municipal law.
Yes. And in seconds, the software spat out a fully drafted legislative bill. It had all the formal legal formatting, the correct phrasing, like everything.
That's wild.
It gets crazier. Rosario took that machine-generated text, presented it to his 35 peers on the city council, and they passed it. They didn't change a single word.
And none of them knew.
Exactly. None of those 35 councillors had any idea it was written by an algorithm. They were totally in the dark.
And Rosario even admitted later that if he had told them the truth before the vote, the proposal would have been killed immediately.
Right. And the legal aftermath of that is what really highlights how vulnerable our systems are.
Because when the truth finally came out, the council president was outraged. He called it a dangerous precedent.
But there was absolutely nothing they could do about it.
Right. Under Brazilian law, and frankly, under the laws of almost every democracy on Earth, there were zero legal obstacles preventing an AI-written bill from remaining on the books.
Because the rulemakers decades ago never imagined they'd have to explicitly state that a computer shouldn't write legislation.
Exactly. They assumed the author would always be human.
It's that polite fiction again.
Right. And if this were just one local councillor pulling a stunt, we could just brush it off as a funny anecdote. But the data shows this is a systemic global transition.
Let's look at the numbers.
Yeah, so the Inter-Parliamentary Union compiled data for the year 2024. They found that 12 legislative chambers across 8 different countries were actively reporting the use of AI in their workflows.
And we are talking about places like Italy, Estonia, Norway, New Zealand, plus the European Union.
Yes. And they reported using 71 different AI tools.
Wow.
Now, some of those are benign, like transcribing hearings or sorting all documents, but many are being used for the outright drafting of bills and amendments.
And that's just the jurisdictions that are voluntarily reporting it.
Exactly. The real number is definitely higher.
Okay, let's unpack this because what's happening behind closed doors is moving even faster, especially in the U.S.
Right.
In January 2026, ProPublica broke this massive investigation into the Trump administration's Department of Transportation.
The DOT.
Yeah, they uncovered that the DOT was actively planning to use Google Gemini, which is a powerful generative AI model, to draft federal transportation regulations.
And federal regulations carry the full weight of the law. They dictate exactly how a business can operate and what safety standards they have to meet.
Right. And the timeline they were aiming for was just wild. The General Counsel told the staff that getting a draft rule out of Gemini should take no more than 20 minutes.
20 minutes to write federal law.
Yeah. Their goal was to take this regulation writing process, which historically takes months, sometimes years, of careful engineering analysis, and compress it down to just 30 days.
And we have to look at what the DOT actually regulates to understand the risk there. They aren't writing rules for public parks.
Right.
They are responsible for the entire national airspace system. They regulate thousands of miles of highly pressurized natural gas pipelines.
And freight trains carrying hazardous materials through cities. So when I was reading this, I tried to come up with an analogy for what is actually happening mechanically here. Because we say AI writing laws, but people need to understand how these models work.
That's a great point. They aren't logical thinkers.
No, they use predictive text, they analyze massive databases, and use math to predict which word should logically come next. They're basically highly sophisticated autocomplete engines.
Right. They map statistical relationships between words. They don't actually understand the real-world engineering constraints those words represent.
Yes. So it's like finding out the safety manual for a commercial airplane was written by your phone's predictive text.
That is a terrifying thought.
Right. It sounds professional, but it has no understanding of physics. And what shocked me in the ProPublica report was the general counsel's candor. He explicitly stated their standard was just a rule that was, quote, good enough.
And the former acting chief AI officer for the DOT offered a very sharp critique of that.
What did he say?
He compared the process to having a high school intern doing the rulemaking for the federal government. Yeah. And the department had actually already used AI to draft an unpublished rule for the FAA before this was even public. The system is prioritizing speed over precision and public safety.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go for it.
When I hear it's like a high school intern writing the rules, my immediate reaction is, well, look at how the legislative sausage is actually made today.
Right, it's not always pretty.
Exactly. Politicians rely on this massive army of 20-something aides, unpaid interns, and corporate lobbyists to draft bills. So how is a machine doing the heavy lifting any different than a sleep-deprived human intern drafting a bill at 2 a.m.?
That raises a really important question, and the difference lies entirely in what happens after the law is passed.
Okay.
This is the absolute core of the democratic problem Johan Steyn outlines. Taka Alliance News and Lawfare both published extensive breakdowns on this concept. It's called the chain of democratic accountability.
The paper trail.
Exactly. When a human aide or a lobbyist writes a law, they leave a trail. There are emails, internal memos, red-line drafts showing the evolution of the text.
So if a massive loophole is found 3 years later, you can go back and see exactly who requested a certain word change.
Yes. That paper trail establishes legislative intent, but generative AI completely black boxes that entire process.
Right, the AI doesn't leave a memo explaining its reasoning.
Exactly. It destroys the mechanism of transparency. You can't audit the author's reasoning, which makes the concept of accountability meaningless.
You lose the accountability chain completely. And it gets even more complicated when we start looking at the training data itself.
The embedded bias.
Yeah. Steyn's analysis dives into this danger of historical bias. We talk about AI bias in tech all the time, like facial recognition failing, but applying that to civil law is terrifying.
Because AI models aren't reasoning from first principles of justice. They predict text based on historical data. So they inherently encode historical power structures and inequalities.
Right. Like, Steyn gives this great hypothetical. If an AI model is trained heavily on corporate legal documents, its baseline for a fair law is going to naturally reflect corporate-friendly structures.
The machine is not neutral. And to make this incredibly concrete, Steyn highlights the specific context of South Africa.
This was a really powerful point.
Think about the legal history there. For decades under apartheid, the law was a surgically crafted instrument of racial and economic oppression.
Yeah.
The legal precedents were fundamentally designed to disenfranchise the majority of the population.
So if you take an AI system trained on that historical precedent and you ask it to draft new equitable laws.
You are playing with fire.
Oh.
The AI doesn't know apartheid was a moral atrocity. It just sees structural patterns in the text.
And those biases can be so subtly woven into the jargon that a human representative might not even catch it.
Exactly. The machine naturally defaults to the historical baseline.
Which brings us out of the theoretical realm and into the immediate real-world financial reality. Because this is already causing massive disasters.
You're talking about Estonia.
Yes. Okay. Tech Policy Press documented this wild situation. Estonia is highly digitized, and they were using AI to assist with draft legislation for their tax codes.
Right.
But the model suffered a hallucination. It essentially omitted a crucial clause that harmonized the new rules with legacy tax frameworks.
Because it lacked the holistic understanding of the entire legal ecosystem, it just generated text that looked structurally correct on its own.
Exactly. And the humans reviewing the bill assumed the computer was right. They call it automation bias, and they just skimmed it.
And what happened?
That single AI blind spot accidentally created a massive legal loophole for online casinos to legally dodge their taxes. It costs the Estonian government around 2 million euros per month.
2 million euros every month vanishing because an algorithm basically hallucinated a tax loophole.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting. How do you think the government responded?
You'd hope they pause the program.
Nope. The Prime Minister publicly encouraged the Parliament to start using more AI tools to actively check and proofread the bills being generated.
Oh, wow. So we are using AI to catch the costly mistakes made by AI.
While human oversight quietly shrinks.
Which has massive implications for anyone operating in the private sector. If you are a business leader or work in compliance, this changes your whole landscape.
Yeah, Transformer News did a massive investigation into this.
They found this entire industry of GovTech startups actively building specialized AI tools for legislators to write laws. And they are selling these to all three branches of the U.S. federal government.
State and local municipalities, too.
Right. And the most concerning finding, there is a complete lack of regulatory guardrails. In most U.S. states, there are 0 laws requiring a legislator to disclose when an AI tool contributes to a bill.
There is an absence of governance around the lawmaking process itself.
So think about what this means for a business in a regulated industry like healthcare or energy. You might have to comply with a law that contains algorithms' blind spots.
You could be restructuring your entire supply chain to comply with a rule that was just a statistical anomaly generated by a language model on a Tuesday afternoon.
And no human ever fully comprehended the logic behind it. It's a massive, unmanaged governance risk.
And doing all of this in secret only makes things more volatile, especially right now. Tech Policy Press highlighted findings from the Edelman Trust Barometer.
Right, the public's trust in institutions is already historically low.
In 11 out of the 28 countries surveyed, the government is already more distrusted than trusted.
The UK is a prime example. Only 29% of British citizens trust their government to use artificial intelligence fairly.
Less than a third. So imagine what happens when the public realizes that elected officials are quietly outsourcing their core duties to generative software without telling anyone.
That 29% is going to collapse. It's a recipe for a total breakdown in civic trust.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's synthesize this. We are living under that polite fiction Johan Steyn talked about.
We pretend human beings wrote and understood every word of a law.
But from Brazilian city councils to U.S. federal pipelines, the machine is already deeply entrenched in the room.
Steyn draws a really fascinating contrast here. He points to the corporate world, specifically the King V Code.
That's the corporate governance standard from South Africa, right?
Yes, and it's highly influential globally. Under frameworks like the King V Code, corporate boards are explicitly required to provide strict, documented oversight of how they use AI.
So a company selling shoes has mandatory guardrails for AI.
Exactly, but democratic governance, the system that can levy taxes, regulate industry, and imprison citizens, has almost no guardrails.
Which Steyn argues might not even be legally compatible with constitutional democracy, because if the process isn't transparent, the law loses its legitimacy.
And democratic legitimacy isn't just some procedural formality. It's the absolute bedrock of your civil rights.
Yeah.
That democratic contract is being quietly renegotiated by algorithms right now.
And technology isn't politely waiting for us to catch up. The conversation has to start now. As we wrap up this deep dive, we'll leave you with one final, somewhat unsettling thought.
Okay, let's hear it.
We focused heavily today on the flaws of AI making tax mistakes and coding bias, acting like a sloppy intern. But what happens when the technology matures and gets really, really good at its job?
That is the ultimate blind spot.
Right. Generative AI models are inherently optimized to find the most efficient route to a stated goal. If we continually hand these systems the power to draft all laws, and we prioritize speed above all else, what happens when an AI logically determines that human democratic debate, lengthy public comments, and messy civic disagreements are simply inefficiencies that need to be regulated out of the process?
The machine might optimize the democracy right out of the law.
It is a profound risk. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the source of the rules around you, because you never know if the invisible author of your city's newest ordinance was an elected official or just a 49-word prompt.